Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 18 of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm pleased and excited to welcome this week's guest to the show. She's a return guest and one who is well versed in the nuances and effects of rape and sexual assault due to her position as Assistant Director of Education and Training at the Crime Victims Assistance Center in Binghamton, New York. You may remember her as Haley Murphy, but since my last interview of her, which was recorded back in 2020, but aired as episode 11 in December of last year, Haley has gotten married, and she's now Haley Roma. I had a great conversation with Haley as we got caught up on a few things like what she's doing in her new position at CVAC, what married life is like for her, and some of the exciting training and assistance that the center is providing in the Binghamton area, and how some of that training and assistance is available to others through the Monique Burr Foundation, which Haley mentioned. Check out the episode notes for the links to the center and to the Monique Burr Foundation. Haley is also looking for input on ways that the Crime Victims Assistance Center can do even more to help the community and is asking for my listeners to email her. So Haley's email address is also in the episode notes. It was a great time getting caught up with Haley, and I think you'll agree that she's an amazing asset not only to the Crime Victims Assistance Center, but to victims and survivors everywhere. I know I think of her as an asset to this podcast. Here's Haley. Enjoy the episode. Haley, how are you?
Hi, Dave. I'm doing well. Thank you for the phone call.
Oh, thanks for joining me. This is so good to have a follow-up with you.
I agree.
Yeah. So lots has changed since the last time we talked, and that episode that I put out a couple of weeks ago with you, it was 2 years ago. I think it was in 2020 that was recorded. I'd really like to start off with having you bring us up to date. What's new in your life?
Sure. Oh my gosh, it feels like just yesterday and many years ago at the same time, but what's new with me? Well, since then, I've gotten married to a wonderful man.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And since then, I've actually gotten a promotion at the agency I work for, Crime Victims Assistance Center. And with that, in turn, I hired a replacement for my position. And so I'm still involved in the work that I was doing at Binghamton University and with the campuses in Broome County. But I have, a more administrative role along with other roles going on. And, I can't believe it. In May, I'll be at my agency, Crime Victims, for 7 years, which is just, I've never been able to say that I've been someplace 7 years before. So
that's
feels
amazing.
like an accomplishment. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on the promotion. What's your new title?
My new title is the Assistant Director of Education and Training.
What are your new responsibilities? How does your job look?
The education department, I always call it, it's kind of a mixed bag of things because every day looks different. So one of my roles is that I make sure that our staff, including new staff that we've had for, long periods of time, as well as any interns and our volunteers, that they all have the information and skills and knowledge to be able to be advocates. And so I kind of administer and organize our rape crisis counselor training, which certifies participants as rape crisis counselors through the state of New York, through the Department of Health. That comes with its own different qualifications and tracking and different pieces that each of those individuals have to complete. So I kind of oversee that process. I also oversee the staff who are out in the community, maybe they're tabling or, outreaching at different community events or connecting with other community agencies that are doing similar, but maybe not quite as victim-focused work that we're doing. And with that comes providing materials, informational brochures, informational flyers for the community about the services that we do, but also about victim rights and about next steps after XYZ should happen. Another big arm of what my role is to coordinate with the different K through 12 school districts in our area, fulfill any requests that they may have to either have us come into the schools and provide education around topics like healthy relationships or online safety. And then overseeing the campus program too, that I talked more about in our last episode. And then a billion other little things here and there scattered throughout all of that.
Yeah. Haley, your plate sounds very full.
It is, but it's really rewarding work. And I think what keeps me going, doing all these different things, is that I have a separation from doing the client advocacy work. And so I think that really allows me to fill my time so heavily with more on the prevention side and the messaging of support and the helping other professionals know how to work with victims and what to expect and how trauma can affect them so that they can do their jobs better. Because, as we talked about before, trauma shows up in a variety of different ways, and almost everyone experiences trauma of some sort, including sexual assault.
One of the big aspects, I think, of what I do in training is helping people recognize that it's not just the survivor of sexual assault or interpersonal violence, that person's circle of influence, the people in their lives that rape also touches because of the changes that occur in victims. Do you address some of that in terms of the training and outreach and advocacy that you guys are doing with regard to the vicarious trauma that the circle of influence also suffers?
Definitely. I think when we talk about sexual assault, the way that it was explained to me once is that it's really like a bomb going off, and that victim, that survivor, is the detonation point, but that everyone around them, including the community and, miles away from them, is going to get hit with some sort of shrapnel. People who are closest to them get hit with the most kind of shrapnel. So their friends, their partners, their roommates, their teachers, their parents, they're going to be affected in ways too. And then, the community at large can feel those greater effects of sexual violence as a social issue as well. And so really the effects can always be found. And so we want people to recognize that. And then we also want those people who may not identify as a victim or, don't experience sexual assault, we want them to be able to be best equipped to be able to support someone who does disclose to them that they went through that, traumatic experience and that traumatic moment in their life. And so that their response is filled with empathy and some level of understanding, even if that's, hey, I remember this presentation about this agency. Let's, find out more about them and get you connected to them.
Because, I love that.
That is how you help someone.
That's fantastic. That touches exactly the areas that I think are super important, that maybe a lot of people in our audience who haven't been affected directly by sexual assault or rape are feeling about a family member or a best friend or a work colleague that they're really close to and have noticed something's off since the rape or sexual assault. Something's changed in that person and it's affecting me too. So I just love that you folks are addressing that as another form of trauma that has to be dealt with.
Definitely. I think that having just a collective understanding of how the brain works and really the impact of how experiencing an assault can change someone in a variety of ways, being prepared and ready and know what resources are available and hoping that someone will respond in the right way so that healing can occur. It's always in my mind.
And I think it's important for people to know what you do locally, regionally, and statewide for New York, but also as a national audience that it's a worldwide audience that this podcast is reaching. And you're making an impact in their lives too, because your message of just talking about what you do, I think is such a positive impact and gives people inspiration and hope and even some direction on where they should be looking for help.
Yeah, I think that, I'm so thankful for this platform to be able to reach those individuals. And I always am looking for instances to spread these messages as far as they can go, because that's when people are truly going to understand the hardships that people go through and what people need to make that next step to turn their life around, to be doing better and to figure out their healing journey.
To thrive and survive and move forward. Yeah, absolutely. We talked a lot about that in our last discussion. So I love that's still a huge focus and at a part of what you're doing. It sounds like it's even more broad in the brushstroke of what you're doing now that you've been promoted. I want to talk a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit more, if you could, about the K through 12 outreach that you're doing and the impact that you're seeing and recognizing and hearing feedback about.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting timing because fairly recently in New York State, there's a new education requirement called Aaron's Law, which is that K through 12 schools have to provide some sexual child abuse prevention education to the students. And that has never been part of the curriculum before, but it really is giving us an opportunity to get into the schools and to give teachers as well as the little ones themselves some concrete information and understanding about good and bad body touches. And the curriculum we use is from the Monique Burr Foundation. It's called Child Safety Matters. And it really, it gives them on their level the definitions of what sexual abuse is and how to identify it. And if you ask for help and that person doesn't help you, go to the next person and ask them for help and keep asking. What I like about this curriculum too is that a part of it is no shame, no blame. And so even if students, the first time they're getting this information, they've already experienced sexual abuse of some sort, it's not that, oh, this is wrong, I'm wrong. It's that instead is that positive message is saying, it's okay that it happened to me. I don't need to be shameful. I can still ask for help. I can still talk about it. I know that the educators that I send out, and even myself, you go to the little ones, you give them all this information, and then the curriculum has you come back a few weeks later, and they remember the different tools that you give them. They remember you. They're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And so I think last year we did 2 of our local school districts, K through 5. And so this year we're only hoping to spread that reach even more because it's a requirement for the schools, but there's no funding provided from the states either for us or for the schools. So it's new. It's exciting.
It sounds exciting. What kind of feedback are you getting from the school districts?
I think it's twofold. They're kind of the same as us. There's there's more things that we have to put in the curriculum and there's not a lot of wiggle room already, but they're happy to find out that our first role is going to be getting into the classrooms ourselves and giving, direct instruction to the students. But then our next step with that is that we're going to kind of be providing a train the trainer program so that we can kind of put it into the schools and they can keep it homegrown within themselves. So we would train the social workers to then do it through all the classrooms. So that's kind of going to be the next phase for 2023 for us. And I already have emails of social workers asking, when can I get trained and start this myself? So
wow, that's great.
Yeah. And I would urge you, Dave, and anyone who's listening to check out Child Safety Matters through the Monique Burr Foundation, because it's evidence-based. It's a great curriculum. It makes sense. It's easy enough that adults and little kindergartners can understand the safety rules.
Fantastic. And that's Monique Burr, Burr?
Correct.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think there's a very strong awareness push going on right now. I'm seeing on social media and through organizations like yours and the Jan Broberg Foundation and several others that I'm aware of. It's really amazing and exciting to know that people and society and our culture is becoming more and more aware of this. And hopefully we're making such an impact that the incidents and prevalence of child sexual assault and adult sexual assault will start coming down.
I think so too, because I think back to when, I was in grade school and how many fire drills and tornado drills and now, active shooter drills, all of those things that get pushed into students' minds. And yes, of course, it's great to be ready for when those instances happen. But when you look at the statistics, and I think it's 1 out of every 3 girls under the age of 18 experiences some sort of sexual abuse.
Right.
That's the information that's going to have the impact. Those are the kind of drills and the curriculums that are really going to be able to save someone and have a child identify themselves being groomed and ask for help and have that response be where it needs to be. And only a few states who haven't passed a law similar to that. So it's exciting to see it.
When you said that, it made me go back in my mind to my early years as a detective. I was going into the schools just very occasionally and talking about good touches, bad touches. That was about the extent of what we did with education on child sex assault and child abuse. And it wasn't all that great. There wasn't a curriculum per se. they
Right.
were
And it was
teaching.
probably, the off chance that you got that invite. It wasn't built into the curriculum, built into the school, which is really, I think, where that response needs to be focused.
Yeah, it's really exciting to hear that.
I do know that the Monique Burr Foundation, they have it set up so seamless that someone can buy the curriculum. And once you do that, it has all the resources and the steps and the materials to kind of get people's feet off the ground.
Tell me about your responsibilities in-house.
Yeah, so a long time ago, probably I think it was in 2012. So even before my time, our agency was identified to be able to train individuals as rape crisis counselors in New York State. And so once they go through our training, which has met the qualifications from the Department of Health, they are given the privilege to work with victims in a confidential manner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's protected by law too. So all of our staff, regardless of if they're finance or education or working with clients every day, they all get that preliminary training to make sure that they can have that confidentiality privilege with those clients to create that safe relationship with them. In turn, that in and of itself, that training, and I always talk about this, is so comprehensive and really is a 40-hour training on what trauma can look like, how it affects people, and what people need after they experience trauma to heal. So we kind of give them an overload of information so that those advocates are then best equipped to help the survivor that they come in contact with. I always say, we're going to give you so much information in this training. Don't let it overwhelm you.
Mm-hmm.
Then you think about it, when a survivor is listening to that information, it is overwhelming, but we want them to give them the best possible case scenario, to have the most control of their case, to take it as far as they can go with it, if that's what they decide to do. Our homegrown curriculum for this rape crisis counselor training, we talk about all the different agencies that we work with. We talk about, the different hospitals that we respond to. We go through a bunch of different scenarios that our volunteers may be answering on our crisis line. So it's a variety of ways that people may come in contact with survivors. And I always say when I'm talking about it, if you're going to work with humans in any capacity, this training is a great resume builder, because it really is trauma-informed care for anyone.
That is amazing information to hear, but it sounds extensive. Like you are packing a ton of information into that 40 hours. It sounds like it's amazing and appreciated. I'm sitting here thanking you because it's what victims and survivors absolutely need and has been neglected for so long. I'm really excited to hear about all of this. Let's talk for a minute about your funding and how the Crime Victims Assistance Center is actually funded, and what maybe some of the needs are that you as an agency have.
I give so much credit to our finance department, because our funding is so interesting to me, and I bless them for even understanding it, because I think last I heard we have 11 different contracts that fund our agency.
That's great.
Yeah, it's great and it's wild. And, what's unfortunate, so a lot of these funders, these contracts are local, state, and even some federal funding. And while, the funding is out there, that's so great, our agency is growing, and if an agency is doing really good work, it's going to continue to grow. And the downside is these funders have a lot of requirements for the funding, and they don't offer a lot of those percentages of the money to go to administration, to go to human resources, to go to staff support. And so it's really oftentimes finding that fine line. I think our agency consistently gets excited about things and takes on a lot. It could cause burnout, and so it's kind of both of that. Here's the funding, here's what it's for, but we don't want to tax out our staff either. And, we do our best to make sure that self-care is at the central of all these trainings, at the central of onboarding for our volunteers and our staff alike. That's sometimes when you're busy, that's the first thing to go. And so I think that my agency and similar agencies like ours, flexible funding is the key. And that's really what I've realized. Flexible funding really allows for you to have staff self-care initiatives, more creative and more even holistic services to offer. The funding streams, at least, the state, federal, those more bureaucratic funding streams, they're very stringent about where that money is spent. And so it's a continual obstacle I'm having to remind myself of.
Yeah, that would lead me to ask and guess that you are also open to donations from the public.
Definitely. We have a donate button right on our website, which you can find at cvac.us. We have a brand new website, so I hope listeners will go check it out. There's a donate button there, and there's a bunch of pages that talk about all the amazing work that we do, as well as information and places to get in touch with and who to reach out to. So check it out. And if you are looking for a place to donate, thank you in advance for even thinking of us, because that's another thing that, funders don't pay for, which makes sense. But if we had a development department, that's my next dream, in maybe 2024. Look at our development and our fundraising so that we can have that flexible funding, which will it eases up everything all around the board. So,
well, and if someone donates without any restrictions on the money that they're giving you and says, use this for anything, and that includes salaries and staff support, like you were mentioning, internal administrative expenses that maybe some of these other big corporate and federal and state grants and donors have those restrictions that you mentioned, I would think that a lot of the public would say, hey, use this in whatever way you guys need to use it. And I think that's important.
Yeah, it really is. I think there's another, almost like a sister agency called Vera House in Onondaga, and they have similar funding streams as we do, but they have really worked on their development so that they can have that flexible funding and that they can have more admin support, more HR support. I think all the people who do even direct client in some ways are doing HR stuff.
But I'm glad you talked about it, and I'm hoping that donations will start coming in from some of our listeners, because I think it's an important aspect of listening to what a guest has to say about what's going on, and that we need to be honest. Yes, these types of programs and educational situations for the schools, now New York is requiring, but not funding. Every penny helps. So.
Definitely. And I think, I'm happy to be transparent with anyone, because I think that's how you make change. That's how you grow as a society. And I think that I understand the systems, but I'm not going to hide what the systems are either. So
excellent information.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for giving me a platform to share it.
Yeah, for sure.
Because my husband hears a lot about it, so he'll be happy that I have another outlet too.
Oh, good. Well, let's talk about married life. Go a little bit personal here. How is that going for you? How has that changed your life? What's going on with you?
Oh, it's so great. Everyone, I get this question a lot, and we had been living together for a little bit before, so not much has changed from day to day, but he's my person, and he is my best friend and my confidant, and I know I can count on him. He is my teammate for life, and it feels good to have that. I think going in high school and college and even afterwards, I feel like dating and the hookup culture, it can get just so dramatic and tiring. But, to all those listening who are through that now, there are people who are ready to just settle, and you'll feel it. I'm just happy and enjoying finding my person and showing to the world that we found our person.
That's
and I
great.
think he would say the same.
Yeah, for sure. I bet he does. It sounds amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I think it comes out, I think, in your enthusiasm, and it really is a great help in our personal lives to have that kind of support when it affects our professional lives. And it sounds like he's all for what you are doing in your professional life and supportive that way. And I'm just really happy that you shared that with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And, I think he and I had to, when we first started dating, or maybe when we first got a little bit more serious and spent more time together, I did have to communicate to him that my work is very tough. And, I also am a survivor myself. So those things interplay, and I want to continue to keep doing the work that I do without getting burnt out, without suffering more vicarious trauma symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I'm going to need certain things when I come home from a rough day, and I'm gonna maybe react differently to things that other people may not even think about. And he's always been so understanding of that and interested and wants to know more and wants to know how he can help. And I just think it's so great.
It is. Thanks for sharing. That's great.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to change topic for just a second.
Sure.
We've only got about 15 minutes or so left, but this is something that's kind of been on my mind for this podcast in this coming year, is the impact that sexual assault and rape is having on our male population. And I haven't had a male guest yet of rape or sexual assault, but it's within the scope of what I train and teach.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm very interested in doing, is having a male guest on here. But can you talk a little bit about the work that CVAC is doing for men?
Yeah, our doors and our services are open to everyone, men, women, those who don't identify, the only people that we cannot serve are those who are perpetrators.
Right.
And I've known that since I started. But what I've seen and what I've learned, and I'm sure you know, and listeners probably have an inkling as well, is that society often forgets men as victims. Maybe parts of our society don't even see how men can be victims because of how parts of our society have been, messages that our society has kind of ingrained. And so I think, since the Me Too movement and all the good people that have shared their story since then, I think it's finally opening society as a whole's eyes that men are victims, A, can be victims, B, have been victims for probably just as long as we've been talking about this as a women's issue. And unfortunately, the patriarchy and the way that these society norms that I'm kind of referring to really, while they don't see men as victims, it's also not providing a landscape for male victims to feel like they can disclose their experience, feel like they can't pick up the phone and call our agency, and that they should just be silenced. I hope and I feel that that is changing, even with just our compiling our annual report right now, and even just looking at the demographics from that and in comparison to years earlier, we definitely are working with more male clients than we have been before, sexual assault victims and domestic violence victims as well. And so we attempt and do our best to keep all of our messaging, all of our images and the information that we put out there, to keep it very gender neutral, and to have people understand that this does and can and will happen to anyone and everyone. And it will affect them also. I wish I could make the men who may be listening now, please write to me and tell me what else we could be doing better. Because I think that it is often a population that, not intentionally, but just gets forgotten because of the history of this industry and victims' rights in general.
Sure, culturally and societally. I mean,
exactly.
Rape and sexual assault are already suffering from such a bias and kind of a negative aspect that for men it's even worse because of the things that you've touched on, the patriarchal society, the patriarchal power, and just in general, most people not recognizing that men can be victimized.
Yeah, in any way, I think we hear, walk it off, boys will be boys, men don't cry, men don't feel hurt, they're strong. And I think those messages that maybe people even don't intentionally put out there or don't even verbalize to someone else, it's just ingrained in certain parts of our culture. And so I think that that really does a disservice to men who are hurting and who need to heal and are looking for ways to heal. I would be more than welcome to talk with men and people who know what we could be doing better, because I think we can consistently be changing our messages and reaching out in different ways.
Right. That stigma is really strong for the topic of rape and sexual assault anyway, but I think in certain ways the stigma is even worse for men. So I'm glad that you guys are addressing that and that you're open to hearing suggestions. Is there an email address that somebody could write to you?
Yeah, it's going to be Haley, my first name, Haley, at cvac.us.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm hoping you'll start getting some emails from our listeners, and you'll have to let me know if you do, because I love hearing about our outreach through this podcast and hearing the impacts that are hopefully positively being made. I know you guys at CVAC and you personally are making such a powerful, positive impact, and I can't thank you enough for all that you do and for taking the time out of your busy, busy schedule. It's got to be overwhelming on certain days, but to stop and come talk to me and our listeners for this podcast is amazing. Thank you so, so much.
You are so welcome, Dave. I really think that, you're right. I can get bogged down with emails some days and feel overwhelmed, but having true, honest conversations like these, there's a place for them too. I think this is where real change, real connection, even real healing in conversations like these can come from. And so I think it's an important part of my work as well. And so anytime you want to chat, you know that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It's great to be able to just email you or text you every now and then, just from a personal basis, to say hi and see how you're doing. I've really appreciated that connection between us. And then, of course, like I just said, your willingness to be on this show and to give of your time this way, and everything that you're doing is so amazing and so helpful and so appreciated, at least from my perspective. And I know from many, many survivors and victims' perspectives also, that people appreciate what you're doing and what your organization is doing. Let's talk about the future for just a minute before we end this. Would you be willing to come back and talk to our audience in the not too distant future about what's going on and how things are changing and growing for you and CVAC?
Certainly. I just had a meeting with my staff not too long ago, and I'm really excited for all the things that this year is going to bring for us. We already are talking about April, as you know, and probably listeners know, there's lots going on in April. It's Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Right.
It's also Child Abuse Prevention Month. And so our agency is holding a Child Safety Summit for the first time, and we're going to make it an annual thing. So we're getting ready for that. And I'd be more than happy to talk about all the crazy and amazing things that we end up doing this year.
That's
I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I'm excited hearing about it. There's just listening to you just now about what's coming up. So we will definitely be in touch. Let's give it about 6 or 8 months and we'll touch base again and maybe get you back on the podcast. I appreciate your willingness. Yeah. Haley, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Of course, Dave, anytime. It was a pleasure. And thank you, listeners, for checking out and reaching out. I appreciate your time also.
Great. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye, Dave.
See ya. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Thank you for listening. Please write to Haley if you'd like to give her some input on ways that she and the Crime Victims Assistance Center can better serve victims and survivors of interpersonal violence, rape, and sexual assault. You can find Haley's email address in the episode notes. I know Haley would love to hear from you. Please tune in next week. I'll be interviewing a 3-time best-selling author. She's a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault, and she's now the executive director of Safe in Harm's Way Foundation and Epizon Strategy Solutions. Both organizations are designed to help victims and survivors of interpersonal violence in the home and in the workplace. Carolyn Markel Hammond will be joining me for a fantastic interview that's enlightening, uplifting, and inspiring all at once. Don't miss next week's episode. And as always, please share this episode with everyone you know. And don't forget to subscribe and rate this podcast. I'd love to have you as a regular listener. Don't forget to do your part to bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. And the best way to do that is to start by believing. Because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.